Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we're talking about the second round of the X²O Badkamers Trofee, and that took place in Kortrijk, also known as the CAPS Urban City Cross of Kortrijk. And we're going to discuss that, and I am joined by Twan.
Hello.
Let's talk about the men's race first. We had a very fast start for Vincent Baestaens. He opened the gap of 8 seconds, but already in the first lap he was accompanied at the front by Toon Aerts. Toon Aerts was on a mission today. He passed Baestaens. Baestaens made 2 mistakes trying to follow Aerts because Aerts was putting the pressure down already in the first lap. And well, Baestaens after those 2 mistakes was dropped. Still riding a very strong race, but Iserby and Van Kessel overtook Baestaens as well. But they were chasing Aerts, and they were chasing Aerts for the entire race because Aerts was flying today. He was flying through the muddy parcours in Kortrijk. In the middle of the race, his gap over Van Kessel and Iserby stabilized around 25 seconds. But in the final lap, he increased his gap to, if I'm not mistaken, over a minute. So definitely a strong showing by Toon Aerts, who took his 3rd victory of the season today. And behind him, Iserby was eventually able to drop Corné Van Kessel. So that was the 2nd place for Iserby and the 3rd place for Corné Van Kessel. Let's talk here first, of course, obviously about that win of Toon Aerts. Perhaps a bit of a boring race, Twan, but Toon Aerts, well-deserved victory today.
Definitely a bit of a boring race, but I don't think Aerts will be too bothered about that. Really been searching for this sort of moment where he was just the best out of everyone again. It had been since Zonhoven, of course, that he won. And today just making a very boring race out of it. Just the best, simply.
Yeah, I think the victory for Aerts was long overdue. I think he said it prior to this race in an interview. The results don't display my feeling of this season. And I agree, Aerts hasn't been lucky. In Beringen, he could have easily won that race, but he had 2 punctures there. If we look further, he was very good in Gieten. I think Aerts was good in the States, but obviously had that very nasty crash in Waterloo, which took obviously a lot of time to recover from. Then was good in Zonhoven, took the win. Has been unlucky on some other occasions. Also bumped into a very strong Iserby at other occasions. But I think very strong showing today by Aerts. If we look where was Aerts the strongest, basically everywhere. And sure, Iserby, he ended 2nd. Still a decent showing, but if we look at Iserby's result today, Iserby didn't come here to win. If we look at his pre-race interview, he said, "I'm more here for the fun. I cannot skip a race this close to home for the local fans, but tomorrow in Besançon, the World Cup is way more important." Twan, if we're honest, if you start with that mindset, there's no way you can beat Toon Aerts, especially if Toon Aerts is on a super day like today.
Yeah, it becomes very hard, and maybe if it's a bit of a drier parcours, there's more time to play around a bit. But when it's just full gas for an hour, that's not something really that you can show up with. It's going to cost you a lot, and it did.
Yeah, I think so as well. The parcours in Kortrijk was very different than what we're used to, because we are used to Kortrijk being a very fast parcours, lots of tarmac in there, and then as well these fast grass sections, but the rain and snow overnight had changed that. No snow, but it was muddy. I quite enjoyed the parcours in a state like this.
Yeah, I think it really added something. It's always nice to see a bit of variation in the parkour from year to year. Rain one year and then a bit of dry the next year, because you get more of an idea of what's possible on there. And I think it made for a much more interesting race in its own way, and it was very good to see the parkour in this state.
To come back a bit on Toon Aerts and Iserby, we just discussed his mindset a bit, but I would still like to bring in what this does to the overall. He just dropped Van Kessel, who we talked about. Then the gap was around 25 seconds. The X²O trophy is obviously the classification on time, so every second counts. Iserby, with 2 laps to go, the gap was around 30 seconds. In the last 2 laps, he loses 37 seconds. He also lost 5 bonification seconds. It's a bit costly because obviously Iserby still wants to win the X²O trophy, otherwise he wouldn't be aiming to ride all those races. So I think Toon Aerts did not only a good job by winning to come back on that win, but also did a very good job in the overall, because Kortrijk isn't a cross where you usually are looking, okay, here I can make up more than a minute time. Aerts was of course almost half a minute down after the Koppenberg. Now he's more than half a minute ahead.
Yeah, certainly a good job. As you said, Koppenberg cross where So most of the differences are made, and then I think Loonhout, Bao, and Herentals are the other three main ones. But to be able to turn the deficit around this much, it's a great job by Toon Aerts.
I think definitely a good performance by Aerts. Iserby a bit less, but he's still definitely in no way out of contention. But he did get beaten by Corné van Kessel, who ended third today. We just talked a bit about the parcours, and I think van Kessel found a parcours that suited him very well today. I mean, sure, there was still quite some tarmac, but there was no time to rest on that tarmac because twice it was a bridge, and there was quite a sprint up those bridges most of the time. So Van Kessel third just continues what we've seen, the progression after a somewhat disappointing season start.
Yeah, getting into the more stereotypical cyclocross weather, which really just suits him a little bit more, just having to be on the power for that whole time instead of flying around in very quick laps.
I agree. Let's look at our entire top 10 then. A top 10 without Lars van der Haar, who couldn't start the race after he had some kind of issue in the pre-ride. He had some issue with his back, and that couldn't be fixed. He couldn't even put on his own shoes, so he could not start the race. But of course, we had that podium which we just discussed: Toon Aerts ahead of Ele Iserby and Corné van Kessel. Not really much to say because the gaps were huge. Behind that, we saw a trio ride for most of the race: Baestaens, who eventually outsprinted Vanthournhout for 4th place, 6th place for D Sweeck, who was with those for most part of the race. The brother of Toon Aerts, Thijs Aerts, ended 7th, ahead of Lander Looks and Tom Meeuwse, both from the Cant Hens Maas. In the 10th place was another brother of somebody who had in the top 10, it was Laurens Sweeck. Let's first talk here about that performance, strong performance from Vincent Baestaens. Continues the trend of what we've seen the last couple of weeks. Don't think we need to go into that he doesn't have a contract for next year again. Somebody sign him, 4th place today, good, but we've already said enough about that contract. Let's focus on his race today, and maybe especially that sprint. He was sprinting for 4th with Michael Vanthournhout. Vanthournhout upset. What did you think about that one?
And Vanthournhout really not having the greatest day, of course, recovering from that bit of an illness that he had last week, so very understandable. And yeah, Vincent Baestaens just very hungry for success, and you see it in the sprint as well.
Yeah, and I think Vanthournhout was obviously upset, but I don't think he has the right to be upset because Baestaens is sprinting at the right side alongside the barriers, and what do we see? There's basically the entire left side of the road. What does Vanthournhout do? He thinks, there's half a bike length on the right side of Baestaens. Let's go through there. Obviously, that doesn't work. Baestaens did nothing wrong there, in my opinion. How do you think about that?
I'm going to have to agree with you there. When you have the whole road to choose out of, and you choose for the place that there was never a gap in the first place, it kind of feels like a moment where you know you're already going to lose the sprint, and you're just like kind of looking for an excuse as to why you lost it rather than actually trying to sprint for the position.
Yeah, I think so as well. Vanthournhout, as you said, was recovering from an illness. And speaking about an illness, his teammate Laurens Sweeck also was ill this week. Had a shocker of a race. In the last lap, recovered to 10th place. Don't really know what was up. They said he missed 1 day of training this week. It didn't sound too severe, but looking at his performance, it maybe was severe. Maybe a drop of motivation throughout the race. I don't really know what was up, but I mean, if it's a bit of an illness going through that team, I mean, we should hope for Ele Iserby and Denise Betsema that they stay escaped from that, because health is very important, especially going towards that busy Christmas period.
On the other hand, Sweeck's brother riding a very good race. Not the strongest field, of course, but getting some great TV time for the sponsors as well, and really showing this season that he is up for the challenge, and he is doing, I think, at Cyclocross they can be very happy with what he has done so far this year.
Definitely think so as well. Good to see. And I mean, we've discussed the Sweeck contract a bit earlier and on some of our earlier podcasts as well, but I mean, if I think about it, Sweeck to Cyclocross does make sense, because Cyclocross is lacking a bit of a main leader. Of course, for the Roodhoof brothers, Alpecin is their biggest brand, but I still think they want to give Cyclocross exposure. Sweeck was with the Roodhoof brothers back when it was the Era Vastgoed team. That was the team around Sweeck. Sweeck left that team, kind of disappeared. Era got moved in with Alpecin and then got moved around from some other teams. I think it could make sense to see these brothers reunited at Eco Krelan, but this is pure speculation, and I guess we'll need to wait and see on that one. Let's talk about our women's race now. Twan, tell us what happened there.
It was a very strong start by Marion Norbert-Riberolle as a few women would join her. Lucinda Brandt, Linda Kammer Alvarado and Denise Betsema would be at the front of the race. Eventually they would get rid of the Belgian and they would fight it out between them. Betsema really struggling to keep up with the pace, and Alvarado and Brandt would battle for victory. Brandt just extremely strong throughout the course and putting the pressure on, and Alvarado just couldn't follow anymore, and Brandt was able to round off the race with victory again, as Alvarado would come second and Betsema in third.
Before we start talking about that race, first note on the crash of Jara Kastelein. She crashed in the background. We didn't see what happened, but we read on our Instagram that she came into a deep mud rut, and that catapulted her into the barriers in a similar way as it happened with Maud Kapteins. And that was very unfortunate to see for her. We saw her leave the race in tears. They were fearing that she had broken her wrist. And when we originally recorded the podcast, the reports were actually saying that she did break her wrist, but she's come back from that on her own Instagram and said that she did not break her wrist. So that is some good news, and we hope she can recover from that injury. Despite it not being fractured, we still hope that she can come back quickly. Then let's talk about that great battle at the front. I really enjoyed that one. I mean, for most of the part, in the beginning, it was, I must say, mainly Betsema and Alvarado. Brandt joined that a bit later, but then we had three women, constantly putting each other under pressure, and I thought it was interesting to see. Brandt, as we're used to from Brandt, was super strong on the straights. She could put down the power and open gaps, but Alvarado, her technique today, once again, that was just sublime, and it was great to watch, in my opinion. The way she went through these corners, she could take much sharper lines looking for the green, whereas Brandt was mainly just going straight through the middle. I really enjoyed watching that, and I think it was potentially a bit too much tarmac for Alvarado, but still, the second place, I mean, props to her, and it's, I think, the first time in quite a while she's standing on the podium again.
Yeah, and I think it's finally one of those performances where you say, okay, this is the Alvarado that we're used to seeing from last year. Sometimes on the power a little bit too short, but she can definitely compete for the victory when it is time and when it's more her course. And I think Brandt really looked better, but kept making small mistakes, which Alvarado was able to benefit off to get back every time, and she herself basically made none of them. It's technically absolutely amazing.
Yeah, in the final stages of the race, you could just see that Brandt was still a lot stronger, but as you said, finally signs of major improvement at the end of Alvarado. I was pleased to see that. Good for her to see her back on top. And I mean, what really stood out to me about these mistakes, even in the last lap, there was this 90-degree right-hander almost underneath the bridge with some deep ruts, and Brandt still made a mistake there in one of these ruts, and then Alvarado came and she just flew straight through that. And I mean, obviously part of it is the technique of Alvarado, although I must say today there was nothing wrong with the technique of Brandt, but I did have the feeling that Brandt was running slightly higher tire pressures. It could potentially be a bit of a extreme effect of just the power that Brandt has, but I still had the feeling that Brandt was running slightly higher tire pressure, so that could have influenced her as well, and eventually leading to her making these mistakes. That's one theory I have, but nevertheless, I think Brandt was a deserved winner. Do you think that Alvarado could have done anything to take the win?
It's very hard, right? Because sprinting up that bridge, I would always favor Lucinda Brandt. So even if you manage to stick with her, you actually have to drop her before you get onto the bridge, I feel like. So it's very hard, but she put up an amazing fight.
Yeah, I think it's especially hard on this parcours to make a difference. I mean, the mud made it technical in some sections, but then if you look at the bigger picture of the parcours, on the technical part, there's nowhere where I really think, okay, this is where you can make a difference. Because even Brandt was running the stairs whilst Alvarado was hopping them, it made a super small difference because the riders who hopped them needed to take a wider line, basically equaling out running and hopping. So, I mean, where is the difference made? Even in the mud here, the difference was really made in just making the least amount of mistakes and overall just the condition you have. So, if we look at who's the strongest rider at the point, definitely Brandt. Betsema, who was in the leading group for a while, she was, in my opinion, for I think the last 3 laps, just hanging on. She could barely keep up on the straights, and then was able to stick on when the pace dropped a bit or by taking some risks. But eventually in the last lap she was really dropped and lost a lot of time for her classification as well.
Yeah, I do believe she did crash a bit in the background as well, which certainly didn't help. But as you said, really struggling to keep up. And yeah, just another one of those days where Denise Betsema, it's the form hasn't quite been there since the weekend of the European Championships.
Definitely agree. I think overall another solid performance by Betsema. Betsema super consistent this season, but as you said, just not quite at it. And then that crash in the last lap doesn't help. She crashed onto her hand, which was still injured from Overijse, I believe. So that was very unfortunate. There were quite some crashes in the women's race. That crash up Baestaens, now I think about it, that was really weird. I think Betsema said she crashed into the barriers as well at a different point. But yeah, that was weird. And of course, we already discussed the Kastelein crash. That was also with the barriers. So very, very weird to see that many crashes, especially on those somewhat strange places. But I mean, let's hope for Betsema that the consequences aren't too severe, because tomorrow could be a day for her. Besançon should, in my opinion, be a parcours that suits her. But then again, it should also suit Brandt. What do you think?
I haven't really been able to look at it too much. But those two women, of course, some of the best around, so always in with a good shout.
Let's look at our entire top 10. The world champion took another win here, Lucinda Brandt, ahead of the Dutch champion, CM Del Carmen Alvarado, and then Denise Betsema in third. If we look further, we see Annemarie Worst in fourth, and then for once we're actually done with the Dutch flags. We saw a very strong performance by the Star Casino team with Anna K in fifth, then Sanne Cant in sixth, and Riberolle from the Star Casino team again in seventh. Rochette, after the cancelled Canadian Championships, decided to come over to Europe last minute. 8th place for her ahead of Clara Honsinger, and the 10th place was for Christine Majerus, who rode her first race of the season. Let's first focus a bit about the riders who were fighting for the 4th place. We had Annemarie Worst, kind of disappointing after her win last weekend in Koksijde and a strong showing. What do you think was up with her? Was it the parcours? Was it potentially a bad day or just some decompression?
There's of course a lot of factors that could come into play. Maybe the back was playing up again. It was really disappointing to see her not with the front three for the majority of the race and battling for 4th instead. Really hope that she can pick up the great line of form that she had into Besançon.
She was fighting with a duo of Star Casino for almost the entirety of the race, K and Riberolle. First, Riberolle. What a strong ride by her. I mean, technically it lacked. There were some very small hops that needed to be made and she was lacking there. Faded a bit towards the end of the race. But still, 7th place for Riberolle and could have been a bit higher. But I think Riberolle, I was surprised to see her do such a good race. Of course, there had been some improvement the last couple of weeks, but this was above what I expected.
Yeah, it's really strong. There's of course quite a few of the Dutch women missing, but just the place where she was in the race, I think it's very promising. And of course, it would have looked a bit worse, I think, if some of the U23s were here, for example. But just doing an all-around solid job, very strong start, and able to continue it for quite a while instead of completely falling back like we have seen before.
I mean, there were 2 other performances that stood out to me, besides, of course, Riberolle. First of all, her teammate, Anna K. She had a very surprisingly good race, in my opinion. Of course, we know the potential is in Anna K. That's not why I'm surprised. We know she's extremely talented. She's developed to a well-rounded cyclocross rider. But I was more surprised considering her results last week. She struggled a bit in Koksijde and Merksplas. Of course, had a strong comeback with a victory in Leuven and also a top 10 in Niel. But Nevertheless, last week she suffered a bit. Now she's back. I mean, it's not strange after coming back from an injury. You usually have a strong return. We saw it with Alvarado as well, a bit of extra freshness, which helps. Probably extra motivation, thinking, "Oh, I'm back. Let's show these other people what I'm made of." And then the week after, a bit less. Probably also the running didn't really benefit Anna Kay. So that was another standout performance in my opinion here. Kay eventually just beat Sanne Cant. Sanne Cant also a good performance in my opinion. And the start was just very typical for Cant. Her season, I mean. This season, Sanne Cant has been having a lot of bad luck. And it continued here. Before the race, she was showing her fighting spirit. Oh, I'm going to come here, fight for top 5. And she did. She went into the field first, and then we come to the first slippery part, and Cant was probably just too excited and crashed, and then was, I think, 20th, and then managed to come back to 6th, putting in quite some good lap times towards the end of the race, so also a strong performance by Sanne Cant here.
Yeah, I think there was some other very interesting things in the race as well. I think she rode a very good one. Someone who I think is just very disappointing again that she loses so much time today. It's Clara Honsinger, of course, leading the classification before today, and then in a relatively easier cross for her as well, she manages to lose 1 minute 50 toward Betsema. It's just very disappointing, especially if she was planning on competing for the overall victory, which I think could have been possible. The problem is just like courses like this where she doesn't quite get her power down and then doesn't get the engine going, basically.
Yeah, it was. I think I didn't expect her to be good, but I expected her to be better than this. I don't really know what's up. I still have a bit of a theory that it's some, I don't know, maybe a bit of decompression after that impressive win on the Koppenberg. That was more than she ever imagined. And then I don't know, I mean, it can be a lot to process and stuff. But, I mean, yeah, it's hard. I expected her to be better. She has been better on courses like this earlier as well. I mean, last year she would still end in the back end of the top 10, but with a slightly stronger start field. So a bit weird. And I mean, she was with Majerus for quite a while. About Majerus, I think first cross of the season, 10th place, very good result for the rider of SD Works.
Yeah, very solid, and just nice to see that she has come back again for a stint in Cyclocross. Always fun to see the Luxembourg National Championships kit in there.
And she wasn't even the only road rider we saw at the start today. I mean, Majerus, of course, riding for SD Works, but we saw Lorena Wiebes at the start today. I mean, she was in 10th at some point, then dropped back, and eventually got taken out of the race. But I think it was still fun to see Lorena Wiebes, and I think there were some other former road riders, or actually, no, not former road riders, just road riders at the start as well today.
Jessie van der Bulke actually made the broadcast as well with... a bit of a silly mistake, really unfortunate moment for her, not quite getting up the small hill and then sliding down it again, really awkward, but really nice to see her in the field too.
Yeah, I like this trend that more and more riders are picking up a couple of cyclocross races. I mean, although they don't do great, I still think it's fun to see, and just for comparison, that cyclocross is hard, and it shows it does benefit riders, as what we've seen with the Heinrich Hausler podcast, what he told us there about it. So I think that's really fun to see, and I would love to see this trend continue, especially from riders who did cyclocross in the youth categories, like with Lorena Wiebes. Speaking about youth categories, there was a men under 23 race today as well, and Pim Ronhaar took the win there, the world champion, taking a second win in the, I think it's called the Rookie Trophy or something, but we'll just call it the X²O Trofee. Ronhaar taking his second win, second place for Cameron Mason, and then it was Joran Viseur in third, Mees Hendricks in fourth, and Anton Ferdinand in fifth. I think another not entirely surprising result here. Ronhaar is a bit inconsistent, Twan. I think maybe the under 23 races suit him better because they're a bit shorter, but still Ronhaar, we know the talent is there, and ahead of Cameron Mason, this 1-2 is kind of expected.
Yeah, and showing the talents on the day that it is fighting for the victory with fellow U23 riders. Unfortunately, wasn't able to do it at the European Championships, but that is now 2 out of 2 in the X²O trophy, or what the name would be for the U23 category. and extending the lead over Cameron Nason.
Yeah, we'll see tomorrow. Obviously, some guys like Mace Hendricks weren't there because they ride tomorrow in Besançon. And yeah, we'll be back tomorrow with a podcast about Besançon. Not the most exciting day of racing today in Kortrijk, but nevertheless, Twan, thank you for joining me once again.
Thanks for having me on.
And as said, tomorrow we are back with a podcast about Besançon. Thanks for listening, and we hope you tune in again tomorrow. Goodbye.